So welcome. We have a guest speaker this evening, Whitney Storr, who will be sharing some great information about assetting mapping all of your assets in your loved one's life. And it's a really great tool to have in place, and then figure out where you need to develop your assets. And I love it as a place to start for families. And so go ahead and take it away, Whitney. I am going to probably share the screen with you, correct? Or let you share your screen?
Yes, if you can give me screen sharing, right?
It's only letting me do you as host. So you're the host now. You may
Okay.
proceed.
Well, let's hope my internet does not go out randomly and kick everybody off then. Okay, I am going to share a presentation. And yes, I am. There we go. Oh goodness. Okay. So thank you for inviting me tonight, Darcy. And this presentation is Family and Community Asset Mapping, Introduction for Family Caregivers, with that term defined very broadly, because this is useful for just about anybody who is involved in caregiving. And also if you are someone who has support, or if you are just, I don't know, looking for a way to kind of like better understand the community around you for non-caregiving purposes. This is absolutely a viable tool to kind of like look at the community around you and what you have going for you. So my name is Whitney Storr. I'm a medical mom, family caregiving activist. This is me. On the left there with my husband, Jason, and my little guy, Malachi. He is 5 years old. He is very medically complex. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a wife and mom, a parent caregiver, and an advocate. And I have a nonprofit that's called Kids Rise Fund, where I get to do fun things and give presentations and get involved in advocacy, which is kind of where my heart is. So what is asset mapping? Asset mapping is a tool that parents and families or anybody can use to better understand and visualize the network of support and interrelationship of programs and services that impact them or their family. A completed asset map, which I guess it's never fully complete because it's always dynamic, it's always working, it's kind of a living document. But once you feel comfortable that you have a pretty complete asset map, it will give you a reference point and show you all of the programs and services that are currently impacting your family that exist within this hub around you, this network around you. And because it shows kind of all of the branches that kind of, grow out of from your family or from you as an individual, it can also show you where there are gaps in services and the supports in that network around you. So asset mappings, it's not a new thing. A lot of different organizations can refer to them as like care network or community support network mapping. So why create an asset map? This is a different way to view your family's larger network of care. It is a very visual way to look at the different connections between programs and services. It can help you identify those gaps in care and coverage. And when you're talking about like gaps and you have an asset map, they can be very, very visible. You will have a map of all of these wonderful programs and services around you, and there will be just like a blank space. And you're like, well, there's a gap that exists that I can work to address. And so for those of us that are kind of like visual thinkers, or think in pictures in that way, this is another way that we can kind of, help consider what exists, like where we've really put a lot of effort into and where we may need to look at different programs or different, creative solutions for filling in those gaps in care or support. So this is an example of one family's asset map, their community support map. And it's, pretty informal. It is freehand. It's kind of like goes off in all different directions. And you can obviously go back and make it as pretty or as, well organized as you want. But this is a pretty good example of what these can look like as you continue working. So next steps. So after you kind of have created these maps, and we're going to talk more about exactly what those maps are, but once you have a completed asset map, what do you do with it? Why put the time into creating this? Why use this tool if you're not going to do something with it afterwards? So one thing is, once you have this completed asset map, you can look at it and you can say, where are the gaps in my map? And how might those be filled? You can use this completed asset map as this launching pad for like deeper brainstorming. And also that encouragement to identify new opportunities and to expand your network. And so if part of your asset map says that you haven't really built up your network in terms of recreational activities, that's where a gap exists, then that is something where you say, okay, I'm going to really focus on that and kind of explore things that I might be interested in, that my child might be interested in, that my family member might be interested in. Because the whole idea here is that for every one of us, our life is, we are the hub of our own personal universe. And everything kind of branches off, and we can all create these network maps that kind of build up into different aspects of our life. So, we have our work life, we have our home life, we have our extended family, we have recreation activities, we may have a church or spiritual community. All of that is part of our network. And so when you're looking at like those different gaps that exist in terms of caregiving, that's a real opportunity to look and say, okay, how can I strengthen this care network around my person or, around my family? So you can also use this information for advanced future planning. One of the things that you include in an asset map is things like your financial connections, your within that, like your estate planning, or maybe it is connected to guardianship, or things like that. So if you are looking at a completed asset map and you don't really see a lot that has to do with programs and services that might be supportive of future planning efforts for yourself or for your family or for the individual in your care, then that is something that you can kind of like look at this map and say, okay, how can I think through this? How strong are these current connections? How might these connections change over time? What does future planning look like on this map? And what type of effort or opportunities exist currently that I can use to help expand this network? And then you can use this information to inform other planning tools. So things like person-centered planning tools. There's the Charting the Life course tools that I know quite a few organizations use. There's things like those annual one-page student introductions for classroom teaching teams. I know DDA uses a different kind of person-centered planning document. I got one on my kids' last annual assessment. So different types of person-centered planning tools. You can use them for care coordination or care management tools for your family to kind of think through things like that. And you can use these for goal setting for yourself. If you look at this and you're like, hey, I want to make one of these for myself. I want to know where my care network exists as a caregiver. This is a good way to visualize that. Okay, so we are going to workshop this a little bit. So if you have the ability to grab paper or writing tools, open up a blank page on a tablet that you can draw with your little finger on. And we're going to go through this kind of step by step. definitely feel free to open up your mics and we can talk through it. So it is not just my voice the whole time. That would be great too. And the goal here when you're first going through this is to just brainstorm as you go. We are just throwing this down, and you can obviously go back through and reorganize it in a way that makes sense for your mind later. So we are going to start. So at the center of your network map is you or your child or whoever you want to create this for. In a caregiving situation, we're probably looking at the person who is the care recipient. So your child or your parent or your sibling or whoever that care recipient is. So that is the centerpiece. Around them is going to be the immediate family. Mom, dad, siblings. It could be, if you are caring for an aging parent, that would be you, or your spouse. It could be your siblings. Anybody that is like a direct care provider would be in that second circle around where we're looking at like that purple area. And then we go out into like a third layer. And that's what these asset maps really are. It's just like it's layers upon layers upon layers and kind of, expanding out to everything that impacts us. So in this third layer, we're looking at different buckets. Like if we could divide our life into different hubs, this is where we would note that. So in terms of common caregiving buckets, you're going to have your medical, and possibly a home care if you have people in and out of the house, whether those are nurses or personal care providers, things like that. Anybody that's going to impact the home care versus the medical care. If you have a church community, a spiritual community, something like that, that would be another hub. You can have your financial or legal hub, so the kind of the money people. And depending on what your kind of personal situation looks like, you can also divide that out into different spheres. I think for a lot of people in terms of future planning, I think most of these asset maps kind of bunch those together, but you can do what makes sense for your life. There's a school bucket if the person that you care for is still in school, or whether that's a K through 21 type of situation, or if it's a community college or a tech training program, or whatever that is. If they are older and they are of working age and they have employment, that can be another hub. My kiddo is not of that age yet, so I did not include this on this example that I work out to be an example of how my care situation is. Another hub is community activities, community groups. Another hub can be your friends or social groups, and again, depending on the particular scenario of the care situation, that also could be separated out, the friends and social clubs. And then advocacy is another kind of bucket that a lot of people include.
Can I
know
ask a question?
Yes, please do.
I was going to ask really quick, sorry. The center one, so the middle one would be my brother.
Uh-huh.
And then the people on the outside of him, so he does not live with me. So he is in an adult family home. So and I see a lot of family here. So for instance, our sister lives in town. So would like myself, our sister, all kind of be that center, and then like the home care at the bottom, would that be his caregivers at his home?
It kind
Or,
of, I think you could do it either way. I think it just depends on what is going to make the most sense in terms of how you want to like visualize how care is provided. Like an adult in his adult family home, who is managing the care for the most part. When I look at kind of this purple circle, it's mainly like care managers, like who really oversees that care, who's most involved. And for some people that could be, you know, the people at the adult family home. It could be a neighbor or a friend, anybody that's really very involved can be that. You know, in the case of like, let's say like a older, my grandma she's at the point where she receives 24-hour care. My mom lives with her. So my mom would be in that purple circle. Would my dad does not. So my dad could be part of, you know, we could put him as like the home care or like kind of like those secondary tiers in terms of care providers. You know, my brother, her grandson, provides some care, but probably wouldn't be involved in that purple circle because it's a secondary level of care. They are fill-ins when my mom, her primary care provider, is not available for, you know, whatever reason. And all of these are going to look completely different. Just depending on, you know, age changes a lot. And just this particular situation of every family is going to kind of change some of these too. So any other questions before we move on? Are there any other buckets kind of around this in this red area, these red hubs that you included or can think of?
Especially if we're going to put anything inside a vagina or inside of a butt.
Okay. All right. So once we have this kind of like third level with these spheres of our life, we continue to work this out. So this is the next level of kind of involvement in our asset mapping, and like can start down at this medical side in the left bottom corner. So in the medical side, especially for like, you know, people that have a lot of like medically complex care involved in the care coordination, you're going to have your clinical care. So that is going to be, or your specialties, other people might say. So that for a medically complex kid, that is like my kid, that is going to be very, very long. That might not be so long for other people. Care coordination. So who or what organizations are involved in regular care coordination. There's you know, special programs or specialized programs that might not be the same as clinical care. You know, people might include like ABA programs or, you know, like feeding therapies that aren't quite clinical care in that type of bucket. Then your PCP, your community-based doctors that are not kind of like that specialized clinical care could also be included in that next tier. In home care, you can include things like pharmacies, DME supply companies, respite providers, home nursing, you know, personal care supports. This could be like your neighbors that sometimes drop by. Anybody that supports care within the home setting can be in that bucket. In your church, it could be pastoral support. It could be, you know, the group that comes out and has a potluck every month. It could be, you know, if you're involved in some sort of book club at your church or within your spiritual community, all of that can be kind of within that bucket. Your financial and legal, that's going to include things like an ABLE account, a DD trust fund, a special needs trust fund, if that was created. Things like insurance policies, healthcare insurance policies can be included in that. For a lot of care recipients, there are multiple insurance policies, different kind of funding streams coming from different locations. You might have a CPA. An attorney is going to be pretty common involved in that. Especially if we're talking about things like guardianship. So anything that has to deal with money management or something that, you know, might have to go through a court system is going to be kind of a branch off of this financial legal. Then looking at the school, and this can be work too, if there is an employment involved. Anybody that is connected or any programs connected with school, or if you have the work bucket. So for school, it's going to be your classroom teacher. It might be a special education instructor if you also have pullouts, or if you are in a exclusively special education classroom. It can be services that you receive, whether those are, you know, brought in to the classroom or pullouts, physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, any other supports that you might receive within the school. And it's really important to kind of like make sure that you're listing like all of the services that you do receive in any of these, right? And this is why this is the first draft, because you will go back and you'll be like, oh yeah, I forgot that. And just kind of like squeeze it into that first draft, because the whole goal is to make sure that this is like robust and encapsulates everything you possibly can, so that you can really have that kind of completed asset mapping. And so services too in the school could be like vision specialists, hearing specialists, somebody, you know, if they have like you know, sensory supports, anything like that, include as additional branches under things like services or supports. If they're involved in homeschooling, that homeschooling part can also be included within the school. Now, if you're looking at like a work bucket, yeah, Darcy.
I was just thinking there isn't a like service system bucket, like for Social Security or DDA, or, and not everybody has that, I guess. But
that is absolutely true. So with like Social Security, I think I think that's a good point. So there you could include in yours either like a services and systems bucket, that you can include DDA, SSI, like all of that. Or I think you could also pull those into other areas. So like under nursing, is nursing or is respite provided through, you know, your Medicaid or your DDA, or do you put your Social Security in the financial? Or so I think you can choose to do it either way, and both are totally great ways to do this. It just kind of, I think a lot of this kind of depends on how like your mind organizes the buckets too, which is great because this is all about, you know, for your mind and for your benefit. So however you want to do that. Yeah, so work, if they have any supports that help them work, if they have anybody that helps them find work, obviously if they have an employer, include the employer, include anybody that supports them in getting to and from work. Depending on what the situation is. Like transportation in itself could be a whole nother bucket. You know, getting in and around like community inclusion type of things, kind of beyond or separate from the community activities bucket could also be a completely different hub around this. It just depends on like how robust and how involved every single one of these is for each individual person. If transportation makes sense to have as its own bucket, then that should definitely be its own bucket. If it makes sense to include that as other parts like the school, like if my kid was taking the school bus to school every day, I would include, you know, another pink box out there that says, you know, transportation support or school bus. So it's about, you know, making sure that you're really thinking of care as really comprehensively and getting it all in there. So things like community activities, where are they involved? Do they do library story time every week? That's a community activity. Are they involved in a Special Olympics? That's a community activity. Do they volunteer at the local animal shelter? You can do all of that within community activities. And, you know, as you start building around that community activities, you know, continue creating those branches and, you know, building it up in terms of like, who are the supports in that? You know, if they volunteer at the dog shelter every week and they work with a certain team, like make sure that you're really like specific about, you know, how all of those branches kind of like build out, because those are all going to be part of the care network. And it's important to reflect the full care network. So friends, social groups, same thing. Just, you know, close friends, friends that they have within the context of a specific group. You know, there's a virtual Minecraft club that I heard of, that some of the older kids are doing since the pandemic, and it's become this really great support group for these kids, and that absolutely should be included as like a social group, but it might be different from the friends network that they have, you know, in their neighborhood. And so you know, Instagram or Facebook groups, like parent support groups that are diagnosis specific on Facebook, that are a very important part of providing, you know, support and learning things, can be included in this friends and social groups hub. You know, but they're not going to be, they're going to just separate from your community friends. And so making sure that you like really think of that even that friends and that social groups in terms of a very like broad spectrum of, you know, who is there to offer that support. And then this last one, support and advocacy. These can be advocacy organizations like the ARC. It can be support groups like parent support groups, or support and advocacy groups like People First, or some of those I know, Darcy, you said the over 18 parent group, or like anything that is really like helping to provide either support for the individual, support for the family, and caregivers, or involved in like kind of that support advocacy role. And so obviously like your elected representatives are not so much support as they are going to be connected to you through your advocacy, but definitely important to put on there because you know, their actions change policies that impact your support and the support available to you, the individual that you're caring for, and to your family in a big way. And so making sure that within that support and advocacy hub, you really think of that broadly too, in terms of like everybody who's either actions through advocacy or their support can impact you as the family or the person you're caring for. Okay, any questions on this next tier or thoughts? Okay. So once we have this kind of, I guess, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4 4 levels of this branch. This is when it gets very specific for, even more specific for the individual, because this is when you're really going to start naming specific things. So this one is an example that I did for my kiddo last year. And you can see this is when we really went through and we started naming like different things. So starting in the medical, branching out from the clinical care, you start seeing like very specific specialties, everybody involved in his care. Care coordination, you start seeing, you know, social work, inpatient supports, specialty programs, you know, autism center feeding, NAPA, private therapy sessions. And then within the kind of the prescription DME buckets, you know, we have like specific pharmacies, specific DME providers. And so we went through and we started getting more specific about what this looks like. And I created this when my son was kind of in this transition period between coming back from virtual learning and trying to figure out what we were going to do and what care looked like as we were making that transition following those pandemic, I guess the reopenings of everything, because we wanted to see where our big gaps were. And I can say this would look very different if I did this right now for my family. But we noticed right away that, you know, we did not have a lot of build out in things that were very social oriented. We didn't have a lot of friends and social groups. Our community activities were growing, but still there was a gap there. Same with like our financial legal area, like it was growing. We were working on it. We were in the process at that point of doing our estate planning. So like it was growing, but definitely gaps. And we were very medicalized. So, you know, we had our big bucket areas were in the medical home care world, which for a medically complex kid makes sense. But this definitely helped. It definitely like showed us, okay, you know, as a kid that spent most of his life in isolation and then in pandemic isolation, it makes sense that we don't really have a very robust social network. But clearly that's something that we need to work on. And so that is how we use that and how we continue to use that. Yeah. Any questions on that? Darcy, have you ever done a full mapping? Asset map?
Cabinet, and I need to. Yeah.
I think it would be really something that I think would be a benefit to families as their kids are going through transition years. Yeah.
How often do you think it's kind of like maybe financial planning as well? It's like you update when there's big major life changes or something, or revisit it annually and see if there's any place that you need to go and look and put changes. But I see this as definitely that, okay, as we're planning for future and that big worry about what happens when I'm no longer here, if like I can put this on paper, I think I know like the areas that we're missing, but it sure would be nice to have it there. I think this also is so I've realized this time seeing this, that it's really it would be helpful too for anybody to step in as like a new care person to see and be able to look at and understand better.
Yeah, I think it would be very helpful at really specific points along the kind of just like growing up and growing into care and those major transition points. I I do think that it is helpful as something that as like an annual thing just to look at and see if anything's changed. Um, I don't know. You know, some people do vision boards. Caregivers maybe update their annual asset care plan. I think for us, it's been really helpful in terms of like anytime I'm like, I just don't know what we're doing as like where care just kind of seems like very scattered and we don't really have like a something we're aiming for at all to sit down and like okay, like here's what we have available. Here's everybody involved in the care. What are our goals based on like what is available? And like kind of redirecting and getting us back on the right path and being able to help clarify, you know, what are our top 3 goals for this next year to really focus on. And I think, you know, this would be really great. This was first introduced to me when the Arc of King County did a great like leadership program and they talked about this. And I think my son was like 2 at the time. But the earlier I think that tools like this get in the hands of caregivers, as early as they are involved in the caregiving process, I think that it would be really helpful. And I think too that it's important, like people's brains work different ways, and depending on how your brain works, like you might look at a map like this and be like, oh no, definitely not. Like this is way too, I don't know, disorganized maybe, or scattered, or like it, like, you know, if some people think in like very linear way versus that kind of more visual way, like they're going to prefer different tools. But I think that's it's important to give caregivers different tools to help organize and understand what they have available to them. So this is one tool.
I think I shared with you, but I'll share with the rest of the group. Several years ago, I was helping a parent navigate systems, and she shared with me that she has this wall in her basement that had this on it, like for her son's care, and like just reframing something like that, because at that time I thought, oh my gosh, that looks like nobody should have to go through this. This looks like a crime show, and they're like mapping out who the suspects are. And so, but just looking at it, flipping it and looking at it from this direction is like, wow, this is a tool. This is such a great tool.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I have a thought. The thought process in my mind with something like this is a PowerPoint document. I don't think PowerPoint's, I don't know. Anyway, if you know how to use PowerPoint, which I'm not very good at, but I've used it before when there was something already existing. So I have learned how to make changes to that existing PowerPoint. You could have the beginning one, right? Start out where you're at if you haven't made one before. And then anytime you need to make a change, you could do a save as. So you're always keeping a history of the previous one. And, you know, for instance, my brother had paid employment a few years ago, and then he didn't for a couple of years. So, you know, I would create a new one, or do a save as and make a new one and switch from say community inclusion to employment, something like that. And you could just always, you know, on an annual basis or whenever changes occur, you know, make that new one, and you'll always save the history of the previous one, and you'll be able to go back and say, oh, he did this back then, maybe we could try this again, you know, in whichever grouping you're looking at. I don't know. I kind of see this as a map of my filing boxes for him, all of the different file folders that I have for him. Most of them would fall into something like this, but they're in boxes. You can't see the big picture. And this is a great way to see that big picture, and just be able to pick and choose different things that you want to work on. Or I like the idea of the fact that, you know, if you have it out like this, you can see where you need to work on it. You can see where there are, like you were saying, gaps. So I don't know, I'm kind of excited to do something like this and see where maybe we've got gaps, or anyway, cool.
Yeah, and I think it's surprising where those gaps kind of show up. When I did this, I spent a lot of time. I spend a lot of time still like involved in different like support and advocacy things. And I expected that our bucket over in the support and advocacy would be just like huge, because that's where like like a lot of time was spent. But when you start like listing things out, you're like, holy cow, like for us, like that clinical care had become so part of our norm that I overlooked just how involved that aspect of our caregiving life was. I don't know. I guess it also just like, it's nice as a way to, as a communication tool, like when you're doing like DDA assessments, or, you know, looking at like, I need this many hours of support because of this, you know, when you broadly wave your hands in the direction of clinical care, like, it's just another way to communicate everything that is involved in caregiving for the sake of getting that support too. Yeah. So I will say that once I had something like this, you can use it. I sat down with my spouse and we kind of went over it, and we used it as a way to kind of set those goals for the future. And we used it as a way to talk with, we used it for DDA to talk with our social worker about, or our case manager about things that we needed. We used it as a way to say, you know, we really need to, you know, find somebody to do special needs trust. Like we need to figure out the ABLE, we need to figure out the DD endowment trust. We need to figure out like how to get our kid more involved in community activities. I need to figure out how to get more involved in you know, social groups of for the family versus you know, the fact that we have Instagram friends. That's not quite enough to have a robust network of support, is having Instagram friends. And so using that as a way to plan as a family too, and to have those conversations around care and who needs to provide support where, and who needs to, you know, who's, you know, skills and interests, or, you know, just special abilities might be best suited for, you know, focusing on a particular aspect of care, and being able to kind of knock that, you know, expand the involvement in that bucket area. And then, you know, kind of rolling that in, like I said, to those other like planning documents, the you know, person-centered planning documents, charting the life course, goal setting, all of that. These kind of all like play off into each other. And I can't say that I do not have a room where this is written on the walls. Mine is very much remains digitized. But also I probably do need to go back through and update ours, because I have not updated it since last year, and it has already changed a lot, which is just kind of the reality of caregiving. So yeah, living document.
I love the
Yes.
idea of making it electronic, so that that it's easy to update and it doesn't feel
Mhm.
a big project. I think so for work we're supposed to do a vision board kind of thing, and it can be our work, where do we see ourselves, but also like your family and stuff. And I'm like, I think mine is going to be, my vision board is going to be an asset map. I'm like, that can work, right? And then I'm doing for work, using a tool that to help me learn how to,
Right?
yeah.
It's 2 for 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think more than anything when I was first doing it, it was something that like forced me to sit down and say, like, you know, when you're like you get into like caregiving every day and you like lose like I've become so overwhelmed with caregiving at times that like I forgot that I was like didn't have goals for myself, or like I had forgotten like I have like dreams that I want to do too, or like even like, you know, that self-care for caregivers and all of those things. Like, how do you work all of that in if you don't have a good handle on what your care network really is? Um, and so building that in, and also like I really think it is important to do something like that with the caregiver at the center versus the person receiving care at the center, because our care networks may or may not look very different from that person. And you know, we need to set goals for ourselves. And so I think that like in my ideal world, if I was like working with especially like caregivers of people that just got diagnoses or in kind of like those trenches, I would definitely work with them, like putting themselves at the center and building out their network around themselves, so that they don't lose track of the fact that like, yes, you're a caregiver, but look at this giant network of like of things that you also are. Um, and using that as a reminder and like a way to just keep them, I don't know, you know, remembering that they are a they are a caregiver and other things too. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I don't have any other questions or thoughts. I think this is great, and I'm so happy that you came in and spoke with us. I think
Yeah.
it's a great tool, and we all need to go practice and then share out next time we meet.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a pretty simple tool. It's just a matter of kind of like sitting down and like going through things. And like you said, Meredith, it like for those who have like binders of documents, like going through binders for what you don't have in your head, and dropping things in those buckets. I am not the best at binders. I'm terrible at it. And so things like this tool were especially helpful for me because I didn't have, I wing it without binders most days. So I think tools like this are really helpful for those without organizational skills.